the turbulent, bitter fights surrounding his nomination, my fervent hope is that Brett Kavanaugh will work to lessen the divisions in the Supreme Court so that we have far fewer 5-4 decisions, and so that public confidence in our judiciary and our highest court is restored.
Welcome back to AM Joy. So it's not at all clear where Susan Collins gets that optimistic take after she, along with you and the rest of us, watched Brett Kavanaugh's hyper-partisan, rage-filled, conspiratorial presentation during his confirmation hearings. And yet, we are just mere hours away from Senate Republicans and one Democrat voting Kavanaugh through onto the Supreme Court. His confirmation is all but assured after Collins announced that she would vote yes in a floor speech that went on for more than 40 minutes yesterday. She was quickly joined by Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, who also said that he will vote yes, as sexual assault survivors chanted, "Shame, shame, shame on you."
Shame on you! And we all shame on you! Shame on you!
We are expecting that final vote to take place this afternoon, and you can expect Donald Trump to take a victory lap tonight as he rallies his supporters in Kansas. Joining me now, Professor of Law at Georgetown Law School, Paul Butler, editor at AboveTheLaw.com, Elie Mystal, MoveOn.org, senior advisor Karine Jean-Pierre, former FBI special agent John Minderman, author of In Pursuit, From the Streets of San Francisco to Watergate, and Republican strategist Caton Dawson. Thank you all for being here. I want to start by talking about the FBI investigation. I want to go to John Minderman, who's new to the show, and this is element 2 for my team. The New York Times writes that the FBI review of Kavanaugh was limited from the start. A clip, a wide-ranging inquiry like some Democrats were remanding and Trump was suggesting would be potentially disastrous for Judge Kavanaugh's chances of confirmation in the Supreme Court. The White House could not legally order the FBI to rummage indiscriminately through someone's life, Mr. McGahn told the president. Is that true, John Minderman? Could the White House have not ordered the FBI to do a truly thoroughgoing investigation?
I heard Senator Collins just use the phrase public confidence, and that is so apropos in this situation. This investigation that the FBI did was for the American public, for the president, and for Congress. Everybody, including the American public, should have complete confidence in the results of the investigation that the FBI did. If that confidence is not there at every level, we have a real problem. And the problem could be because the FBI was limited in terms of what is called scope, and definitely limited in terms of time constraints. Time constraints are not nearly the problem that scope is. The FBI is well-equipped, well-positioned, trained, logistical support to work within extreme time constraints and do it very effectively. Wherever agents are needed or technical support, logistical support, 50, 100, 300 agents can be brought in instantly. They all work to the same level with the same support from their supervisors and managers and executives. So time constraints are not nearly the problem of scope. Scope is a severe problem. If the FBI is dictated to and its fierce independence is jeopardized, the American public is not well served.
Yeah, and speaking of scope, I mean, first of all, they finished 2 days early, so time constraints and scope seem to be a problem. NBC News is reporting that there were Kavanaugh classmates who wanted to come forward who were ignored. The FBI did not contact them. There was one text message in particular that seemed to indicate that Kavanaugh was attempting to interfere with witnesses. Text message saying, quote, "Hello, don't effing tell people Brett got in touch with me. I told you at the time that was in confidence." Meaning that Kavanaugh, as early as July, the same month that Dr. Ford came forward, was trying to get in touch with his former classmates in order to craft a narrative about his interactions with the second accuser. Should that have been investigated, John Minderman, by the FBI?
It absolutely should have been investigated by the FBI. And the fact that American citizens had called the FBI and were not acknowledged, apparently, and not interviewed, that is a real problem, because that goes to the issue of what's called scope. So that indicates to me that there were some limitations placed on the FBI's effort by whomever. But any American who calls the FBI at any time for any reason to be interviewed deserves the courtesy and the professionalization of acknowledgement and interview.
Yeah. Paul, let me let you listen to the attorneys for Dr. Ford, who essentially, I won't characterize what they said. They spoke to our NBC's Casey Hunt. This is what they said.
There was no effort to leak this letter and have this unfold as it did. That's an absolute falsehood.
We keep hearing that there are no corroborating witnesses, but in fact there are corroborating witnesses who haven't been interviewed or talked to. And those witnesses can say several years ago, well before Judge Kavanaugh was ever considered for the Supreme Court, she told me that he sexually assaulted her.
They cherry-picked who they spoke to.
Paul, you're a former prosecutor. Is this the way that it would ever work? I know this wasn't a prosecution, it was a job interview, but literally the FBI was just declining to interview people who wanted to come forward.
The fix was in from the beginning when Senators Flake and Coons said that they had a gentleman's agreement, so they didn't need to be specific about the scope of the investigation. The problem is that the all-white, all-male Republicans on the Judiciary Committee are not gentlemen. They're thugs. And so what they did was to rig an investigation which would provide cover for wimpy senators like Collins and Flake to confirm Kavanaugh. It was never about time. The FBI has 35,000 employees and a budget of $9 billion. So they could have interviewed those witnesses who would have provided corroborating information. They could have put Dr. Ford in a car and driven her to the scene of the incident, and they could have strapped a polygraph on Judge Kavanaugh. They did not want to do that because, again, the fix was in. There was one foregone conclusion of this investigation. A real investigation would have exposed, at best, that Judge Kavanaugh, when he was a teenager, was an aggressive, mean drunk, and at worst, that he committed perjury before the Senate and that he sexually assaulted a woman.
And Kate and Dawson, did Jeff Flake play everyone here? I mean, he came forward and made it sound as if he was causing there to be an investigation. There was no investigation. Jeff Flake, did the country get played by Jeff Flake?
I don't know what Jeff Flake's motives are. I know that he's leaving the Senate in duress, and certainly he's not has not been in the favor of the president. How this plays out for him personally, politically, I don't know.
I bet he is now.
Well, he's on. That will be a brief moment. He's on the way out, and we'll replace him with another Republican, we hope, and we'll see how it works out. But I can't say he played anybody. I can say he played his hand out and got what he supposedly wanted, and that was a week's extra. And, you know, remind everybody that this thing was held by Senator Feinstein for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I would tell you that the Democrats on the committee played this thing wrong. They should have started this way earlier than they did. They thought in the back rooms of the Senate where they were high-fiving that they had something that was going to stop this nominee, and it has really backfired. And at the end of the day, there are 3 or 4 more on the list that would suit anybody like me to be Supreme Court justices. And I can't tell you what would have happened to number 2, number 3, and number 4 if the president would have nominated them. But, you know, as Barack Obama told us, elections have consequences, and here are the consequences of elections. Donald Trump won, and he's going to get this second nominee on the Supreme Court.
Well, they have consequences unless it's President Obama trying to nominate Merrick Garland, in which case Mitch McConnell says, well, it doesn't matter who's the president. The only Republicans get to see justices. I don't think anyone's ever going to forget that. But I want to go to Karine, because I think that, you know, let's take Kate and Dawson makes a point that I think a lot of Democrats are making, too, which is that Dianne Feinstein did have this in July, which, again, let me remind you, is the same month Brett Kavanaugh was trying to get in touch with witnesses, not about Christine Blasey Ford, but against the second accuser, Debbie Ramirez. Anywho, Dianne Feinstein, would it have been better for her to use this in the summer?
I talked about this on your show probably a couple of weeks ago, and I wish she had brought it up sooner. And I'm not even talking publicly, but given it to the FBI, asked the question when they were questioning him behind closed doors, and it never came up. And I do wish that it had happened sooner. To defend Feinstein just a little bit, Dr. Ford addressed it, and she feels that Feinstein treated her the way that she had asked her to, which was to keep it confidential.
In closed session, she could have asked.
Yeah, I agree, and she could have given it to the FBI. I totally agree, and it's disappointing.
Yeah, and Ellie, so the Washington Post reports the American Bar Association is now reevaluating Kavanaugh. This isn't over. More witnesses could come forward. You know, in theory, if Dr. Ford or one of the other women wanted to file a lawsuit, Montgomery County's DA said are open to it if somebody wants to file a case. It could actually just keep dragging on, and doesn't that then drag down the Supreme Court itself?
These cultural elites are acting way too little, way too late, all right? Dianne Feinstein, I refuse to accept the argument that Dianne Feinstein should have violated this woman's confidence just so Jeff Flake can grow a spine, all right? We have to stop acting like the FBI is on our side here. The FBI investigation was ordered by a man who has been credibly accused of sexual harassment by 19 different women, all right? It was being run by Don McGahn and Rod Rosenstein, two of Kavanaugh's best professional friends, and the FBI director was one of the Yale Law School cabal that brought us Kavanaugh in the first place. There was never going to be a reasonable FBI investigation. Asking the FBI to investigate Brett Kavanaugh is like asking Kanye West to investigate a library, all right? Information all around, he wouldn't come out with any of it, all right? So now you got to ask yourself, why do we need the investigation in the first place? 2 months ago, in July, in the summer, most of what we know about Brett Kavanaugh, we already knew back then. We knew that he was a partisan hack. We knew that from his resume. We knew that he was a liar. He lied in front of Congress in 2004 and 2006. And we knew that he lies about sexual harassment because he came out of the gate lying about what he knew about his friend and mentor, Alex Kaczynski. We didn't need an FBI investigation. We needed Republicans to have decency. And that is what they ultimately never had.
I mean, isn't it true, Kate? I'm going to read a statement here, a new statement from Debbie Ramirez, but isn't it true, Caton, it wouldn't have mattered what came out about Brett Kavanaugh or even who was nominated. Republicans were going to jam anyone that Donald Trump put forward onto the court, full stop, no matter what they found out about them, right?
Well, we certainly were going to put, there's a list of 4. We certainly were going to put one of the 4 up. That's a fact. And Judge Kavanaugh was the first one up, and he's going on the Supreme Court today.
Is there no embarrassment in the party that this man is going to have a giant asterisk on his name? He's going to be reevaluated by the Bar Association. You've had the National Council of Churches come out and condemn this nomination. Is there no embarrassment that 2 out of 5 of the Republicans on the court have credible accusations of sexual harassment or sexual assault on them?
I wouldn't say there's any embarrassment. I'd say that it's the Supreme Court, and it's a function of government, and it's important to people in the base, and that's really the only people that it's really important to. And this
they only care about the outcome.
It'll come and it'll go. I've never won any elections off of courts. I wish I could, but this one has got a different tenor to it, and certainly there'll be an asterisk beside it for a while until we get the first real decision where there's a 5-4 vote, and we'll see who wins that.
Where he's deciding things like Roe v. Wade, and he's one of the 2 out of 5 is a pretty high percentage of people with sexual assault or harassment things on their docket. But let's go to Debbie Ramirez's statement. This just came out today, and it says the following: 35 years ago, the other students in the room chose to laugh and look the other way as sexual violence was perpetrated on me by Brett Kavanaugh. As I watch many of the senators speak and vote on the floor of the Senate, I feel like I'm right back at Yale, where half the room is laughing and looking the other way. Only this time, instead of drunk college kids, it is U.S. senators who are deliberately ignoring his behavior. This is how victims are isolated and silenced. But I do have corroborating witnesses speaking for me, although they were not allowed to speak to the FBI. And I feel extremely grateful for them and for the overwhelming amount of support that I received and continue to receive during this extremely difficult and painful time. There may be people with power who are looking the other way, but there are millions more who are standing together, speaking up about personal experiences of sexual violence, and taking action to support survivors. This is truly a collective moment of survivors and allies standing together. Thank you for hearing me, seeing me, and believing me. I'm grateful to each and every one of you. We will not be silent. We stand in truth and light. Debbie Ramirez. I'll go to you on that, Karine.
Yeah, it's a powerful statement, and my heart goes out to her. I can't even imagine what she's going through, and other women who've been triggered by this moment the last 10 days. Look, I've been going to the protest here in D.C. I spoke at a vigil on Wednesday, and people keep talking about the energy and what's going on, and I am seeing something that I have never seen before: the anger, the rage, and women. When I went to this vigil, woman after woman came up and started telling their stories, and they had never done it before and wanted that to get out there. And women are incredibly angry, and I don't think it's going to end today or tomorrow or the next day. I think it's going to go till November. And in 1991, they talked about the year later, there was the Year of the Woman, and I think there's going to be the Month of the Woman in November.
Was it short-sighted, for MOVE On to withdraw support from Democrats who could win because of this vote?
No,
like Brett
absolutely not. I think it's time to stand up. We can't. We are not living in normal times, and we can't act like we are. And if you have senators who are Democrats by the D, the name only, that doesn't help us at all. And I think it's time that we take a step.
Let me play for other lawyers at the table, Justice Elena Kagan. This is yesterday on how people view the Supreme Court.
This is a really divided time. And part of the court's strength and part of the court's legitimacy depends on people not seeing the court in the way that people see the rest of the governing structures of this country now. In other words, people thinking of the court as not politically divided in the same way, as not an extension of politics, but instead somehow above the fray.
Paul and then Ellie, Bush v. Gore, eviscerating the Voting Rights Act, Citizens United. People already see this as essentially an R&D court. It's not apolitical.
Exactly. So the rest of the country is learning what many people of color have already known, that the Supreme Court is political, that far more often it protects the interests of the rich and powerful more than it does the weak and vulnerable. And so, yes, the whole point of Trump's campaign, the reason why Republicans are sticking with him, despite all of his many personal immoralities, is about the Supreme Court. Justice Kavanaugh, if he serves as long as Justice Ginsburg, he'll be on the court in 2050.
Yeah, what does it mean for vulnerable people that you'll now have the Congress, the White House, and the Supreme Court all aligned on one very far-right ideological side?
It's terrible, and this has been the Republican plan for a generation.
Yes.
The Republicans have been working for a generation fighting this war to win the court, while liberals have been fighting a war on plastic bags. So great, we won that war. I don't have a straw. Wonderful. This is the time when progressives and liberals need to realize how important the Supreme Court is. And look, I'm not here to talk about the past. Jill Stein voters, maybe they should be punted into the sun. I don't know. But certainly going forward,
yes,
at this point, if liberals are not voting single issue on the Supreme Court, then they're just not doing their job.
Thank you very much. Paul and Ellie are going to stay with us. Karine Jean-Pierre, always a pleasure to speak with you. John Minderman, great to meet you. Kate and Dawson, my friend, thank you very much for being here. And up next, Trumping the Court.
Judge, and he should have been confirmed when he was nominated. But I think that his performance during the hearings caused me to change my mind. He has demonstrated a potential bias involving enough potential litigants before the court that he would not be able to perform his full responsibilities.
Retired Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens is just one of the many who believe Kavanaugh is unfit to serve on the nation's highest court. One concern is that naming such a partisan figure to the court could end any remaining notion that the Supreme Court is apolitical. Paul Butler and Ellie Mastal are still with me. 107 judicial vacancies, Ellie, when President Obama left office, because Mitch McConnell said you will seat no one. You will seat no Supreme Court justice. You will seat no one, and only a Republican will be allowed to do it. He got away with it. Yeah. So now we're at a point where Mitch McConnell has said, I will wield such total control that even if this man is credibly accused of sexual assault, so what? Yeah. Too bad.
The Democrats lost this battle in 2014 when we did not answer the bell in the midterm election to back up Obama. We lost the battle again in 2016 when we allowed Donald Trump to be elected. So now, having lost the war, it's a time to ask Democrats, what are they willing to do now? We've tried it the Chris Coons way. I say we try it the Chicago way, all right? I say we burn it down. So when it comes to 2020, at some point, some Democrat is going to show up on my television and ask me for my vote. And they will not get it unless that Democrat is able to tell me what their plan for court packing is. I've got my own plan, but I want to hear how they're going to pack the court, how they're going to restore legitimacy to the Supreme Court. Because I refuse to look at survivors and victims of sexual assault and tell them that they just have to take it.
Yeah.
And they just have to sit there and have 2 of the 5 Republican Supreme Court justices be credibly accused of sexual harassment.
And you know, so can we play Mitch McConnell? Because I think we should never forget this. That Mitch McConnell essentially said, we own the court. We as Republicans, it's ours. And we have it, and we will do with it what we will. And if you're a Democrat, too bad. Even if you are president of the United States, we own the court. And here he is.
One of my proudest moments is when I looked at Barack Obama in the eye and I said, Mr. President, you will not fill this Supreme Court vacancy.
I mean, that disrespect for the President of the United States was the origin story of what Mitch McConnell was able to do this week.
Yeah, and, you know, as I'm the Albert Britt Professor in Law at Georgetown, Brett Kavanaugh is going to be the Donald Trump Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. These 5 far right-wing conservatives on the court will do the president's bidding. So in some ways, they may preserve, the appearance, or they may not technically overrule Roe versus Wade, but they'll put so many restrictions on providers that essentially women will not be able to get the health care that they want. They may not overrule the right of people to get married to whoever they love, but they'll say, if you don't want to serve those people, you don't have to.
Yeah, and can we just go through, just real quick, I'm going to get you back in, Ellie. These are the moments that for the Democrats say the Supreme Court is essentially an anathema and an enemy to people who are in the margins of society. Citizens United, where they said spend what you want if you're a corporation, if you're rich. Bush v. Gore, where the Supreme Court majority, the Republicans picked a president. Clarence Thomas's confirmation, the first of 2 out of 5. Killing a key part of the Voting Rights Act, gutting voting rights. And that's the supposed swing vote John Roberts doing, and the Kavanaugh confirmation. For Republicans, they have a flip side argument, which is that rejecting Robert Bork, who was openly for getting rid of Roe v. Wade, Roe v. Wade itself, and the Obergefell decision, which allowed same-sex marriage, that to them, those are existential threats to Christians' religious liberty. So the two sides both believe that the court is an existential threat. How can it be legitimate?
Well, the two sides both believe that the court is an existential threat, but only one side acts like it. So, story time, right? On my way to work, there is a Planned Parenthood. And every day when I pass that Planned Parenthood, there is a lone woman out there protesting with a big pro-life sign. I don't agree with her. She's there every day. Sometimes I roll down my window and yell at her. She's there every day. Yeah. The Republicans have done this not because they're smarter or better, or not because there are more of them, but because they are more committed on this issue. I have heard people on this network since Susan Collins did her Laertes thing, saying, oh, well, we can't impeach Kavanaugh because, we're not going to get sick. I don't care. Yeah. I want him impeached. If Democrats take back the House, I want impeachment trials by Martin Luther King Day. And to quote one of my favorite movies, Remember the Titans, I want the Democrats to blitz every down, all right? Because that's what the Republicans do. The Republicans do not fold. They fight. They fight when they win. They fight when they're going to lose. They fight when the odds are in their favor or not. They fight, and it's time for the Democrats to finally show that same fight about these issues, because if they don't, it's a generation. It's a generational change in terms of the rights of women, the rights of gays, and the rights of minorities.
Can we play, because I think that, Paul, it's on the issues of, LGBT people and women and minorities that we tend to focus on the Supreme Court. But Sheldon Whitehouse, who I think has actually been brilliant over these confirmation hearings, because he's reminded people that the real origin of what the Supreme Court has become has to do with money. It has to do with more than just rights. It has to do with dollars and cents. Here's Sheldon Whitehouse.
We go back to a Supreme Court far too often dancing to the tune of a handful of big Republican special interests. Big Republican special interests funding the Federalist Society that is now picking Supreme Court nominees. Big Republican special interests using the unlimited dark money power the Supreme Court gave them to mount TV ad campaigns for Supreme Court nominees. People are catching on. The record of this is undeniable. And as I said, it will be a disaster for the court.
The super rich have captured the court.
Yeah, so we can think of Citizens United, where the court said that corporations have some of the same kinds of rights as human beings. In part, they're protecting their own interests. Brett Kavanaugh, if he's confirmed, will be the poorest person on the Supreme Court. He's the only one who's not a millionaire. Many of them are extremely wealthy. And again, when we look at how they vote, especially the 5 Republicans, what they do is preserve the interests of the rich, the white, and the wealthy. The only kind of discrimination this new court will care about is alleged discrimination against straight white men.
And how are we a democracy if this is a minority? I think 70 senators represent 30% of the country, and they have the power to exert minority rule. The majority of people who live in cities or in urban centers who want gun reform, who want LGBT equality, who want all these things, are being told by a minority, you may not have it ever. We're going to keep the court forever, and you'll never be able to have what the majority wants. How are we a democracy in that instance?
The only cure is more democracy, right? The only cure is more sunlight. And this is where I think the media has to take some of the responsibility too here, right? If we understand that the Supreme Court is a political organization, which it is, then it needs to be covered like a political organization, right? Most people watching the show who are relatively very informed people would not recognize John Roberts if he was having a burrito right next to them, right?
That's true.
And that's partially the media's fault, right? Like, we need to put... you can't, bother a Supreme Court. You can't hold the Supreme Court justice accountable the way you can your congressman or your senator, right? But there's no good reason anymore for the media not to be covering the Supreme Court, for everybody not to know who these people are, for all of the kind of lobbying and pressure points that was put on Jeff Flake to be put on John Roberts the next time he's about to do something. Like, we need better coverage of this, and that's not small d democracy, but that is part of the way to bring transparency to what these robed men and women are doing in secret.
Yeah, I think people are woke up this morning nervous and afraid. I've got a lot of texts from people who are scared, who really feel like their future is now in jeopardy because the one sort of backstop has been the court that would protect you, do Brown v. Board, et cetera. And I think a lot of people are worried that's not going to be the case anymore. Ellie Mastal, Paul Butler, thank you both. Really appreciate you both being here. And up next, the fight over Kavanaugh may have ended in the Senate, but the protests have not ended, and they are still in the streets. We're going to talk about that next.
I think there's merit in that criticism, and that the senators should really pay attention to it for the good of the court. It's not healthy to get a new justice that can only do a part-time job.
Pick through and got to throw a few haymakers at the Me Too movement. But not everything went the Donald's way. While traveling to his rally in Rochester, Minnesota on Thursday, Trump was spotted with a piece of toilet paper stuck to his shoe as he was boarding Air Force One. Maybe he could use a friend to give him the TP heads up. Coming up, one of the protesters who sparked a pivotal moment in the Kavanaugh confirmation battle.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Collins, please go.
Senator.
You can listen to the people here. You can talk about it.
The resistance will be televised. Protesters challenged Maine Senator Susan Collins as she announced her vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. And Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia was protested as well. And of course, he was the only Democrat backing Trump's Supreme Court nominee. Protests gained momentum throughout the week as Kavanaugh inched closer to confirmation and are continuing as the Senate prepares to vote for its final time today. At this hour, organizers of the Women's March and its partners are taking to Capitol Hill, preparing to kick off a No Justice, No Seat march at noon. And joining me now is Ana Maria Archila of the Center for Popular Democracy. She's one of the two women who confronted Senator Jeff Flake in a Senate building elevator, prompting him to call for the FBI investigation of Brett Kavanaugh. It's so good to see you in person.
So good to see you.
So, I think a lot of people who've been texting me over the last couple days have been depressed. Like, people are very upset. Mm-hmm. But what you guys are doing is something different. You're still taking action. Why?
Absolutely. Because we have to fight every fight until the last minute. What happened in the elevator with Senator Flake happened half an hour before he was going into, actually, no, just a few minutes before he was going into the hearing. And we thought the Judiciary Committee meeting was we had lost.
Was a done deal. Yeah.
It was a done deal. I think that what's happening in this moment is something incredibly beautiful. Women, especially women of color, are creating an opportunity for the country to show up and be different. We are doing it in a way that's extremely painful. With our stories, which are very difficult to tell, together we are kind of like weaving a mirror for the country to look at itself and say, is this who we want to be?
Yeah.
And I think our politicians failed the test of this moment. They, instead of being political leaders, they were politicians following the party boss, President Trump. And you know what? We deserve, all of us deserve elected officials who understand that their role is primarily to govern by listening. And that's what was happening in that elevator. That's what's been happening in all these encounters with senators all of these weeks, is people forcing connection, saying, look at me, listen to my story, do not turn away. You have to make sure that you think about me and that you think about the people you love. And that's, we are, in some ways, the fight around Kavanaugh is both a fight for our lives, for a fight to change the culture that we have, but it's a fight for our democracy. And so what I want people to remember in this moment is that our politicians failed. They failed to step to the plate. But we are transforming the country anyway. Yeah. The senators are voting today, the people are voting on November 6th, and we are going to make sure that those votes are counted every single day.
You talk about, the fact that you're trying to force these politicians to look, survivors in the eye.
Yes.
What do you make of the fact that so few of them did? So few of them were able to do it. Many looked away. Jeff Flake was sort of studying the floor in the elevator. You've had senators sniping at protesters, Orrin Hatch and Chuck Grassley and others snapping at protesters. What do you make of that rigid response? Lindsey Graham telling people, boo yourself. I mean, the response to them has been anger.
They're angry. They are resisting something that is happening, which is we are building a new country. We are building a country led by women of color. We are building a country where all of us are demanding a piece of the promise of freedom, and they represent the old guard, quite honestly, and they are desperately trying to look away, but this moment is happening. Yeah. They have secured a very important victory with the nomination of Kavanaugh, and by the way, the vote has not happened yet.
That's true.
So
You're fighting to the last minute.
From here to the protest, but Michelle Alexander wrote this op-ed in the New York Times that said, actually, Trump and the white men that are sniping at, like she didn't say this, but kind of in this moment, is those men are actually resisting the country that's
they're the resistance to the country. Yeah.
And I want to say to people, like, this is a moment we have to feel our rage, we have to feel our pain, and we have to find the power within, but also the power with others. This is a moment to organize, not a moment to despair and sit back.
Thank you for saying that, because so many people are despairing. How do you fight? I mean, obviously the people who are with you are in the moment and understand activism, but how do you overcome that sense of futility that a lot of people are feeling today?
I think that when you have to allow the pain to happen, and remember that you do not have to sink into it. You have to also seek inspiration and seek community. That's actually what sustains us through difficult moments in our personal lives and in our collective experiences. So show up today to join in others, to share your pain and your rage, and then show up tomorrow to a community organization that inspires you, or to a meeting of the Women's March, or a meeting of Planned Parenthood. And also, do not be afraid of your own power. Yesterday, right after Susan Collins gave her 45-minute horrible speech, offensive speech to survivors, over 90,000 people made donations to a crowd pack so that someone can run against Susan Collins. $20 donations, $10 donations. That crowd pack is now at almost $3 million. People are not sitting down. We are not going to allow these elected officials that actually failed such an important opportunity to say, I'm not going to reaffirm the culture that has allowed so many of us to be survivors. So many of us to be violated both in our political experience and in our economy. I'm not going to reaffirm that culture by voting for Kavanaugh. She failed. Yeah. Flake failed. Yeah. And so many others failed.
And you mentioned Jeff Flake. If you had another elevator chat with Jeff Flake, what would you say to him?
I would say you failed. You had a tremendous opportunity to model, as a man in power, as a white man in power, how to begin to repair the pain. And all of us have a role in repairing pain that's collective. The experiences that we have as survivors are both obviously ours, very unique, very personal, but they are collective experiences. That's why we need to understand it's not about the evidence of this one case. It's about the truth that the country was forced to look at.
Yeah.
And so he failed, but we people deserve political leaders that can lead and not just follow the party bosses. So let's do it.
And I have to say that this experience has put the names of people like Christine Blasey Ford, Debbie Ramirez, you, Ana Maria Archila, into the lexicon of heroic women who have forced the country to reckon with itself. So thank you very much for your activism, what you've done.
I want to say thank you to all the women that were so courageous and allowed me to tell my story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to see you in person. Thank you. And coming up at the top of the hour, Republican Senator Ron Johnson explains why he's supporting Kavanaugh's confirmation. But up next, your moral moment with Bishop William Barber. This week made many question the morality of American politics, let alone their faith in American political institutions. And who better to help walk us through this moment than my good friend Bishop William Barber, co-chairman of the Poor People's Campaign and a recently named 2018 MacArthur Foundation Fellow. First of all, Bishop Barber, congratulations on being named a MacArthur Fellow.
Thank you.
So let's talk about this. Well, let's talk about this, because oftentimes when I am feeling stressed out about current politics, I text you. And so I want to try to share some of the wisdom that I'm lucky enough to be able to get from you. How do you respond to people who look at what's happening with Brett Kavanaugh and just feel depressed?
Well, it should hurt us, because there's a scripture in the Bible, Amos 5, that talks about there are those who oppress the innocent and take bribes and deprive the poor of justice in the courts. We really need to look at what's going on, but then we need to respond with an offensive. This was a sham. This is a raping of the political process. There's several questions about this, Joy. What if this was an African-American or Latino man and was accused of sexually assaulting one of those senators' daughter? You know, that's a serious question. The other thing is why? Why is this? Well, this is the same group that already knew that Kavanaugh was fine with torture and mass surveillance. He cares more about corporations than about workers. He cares more about them than the environment. He champions gun rights, and he voted to override, not to override, to uphold a voter suppression, voter ID program in South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. So this was a sham from the beginning. And what we should do is understand now that this is deeper than just Trump. It's about what happens in these state houses, the Senate and the Congress, and why we have to go on the offensive. 80,000 votes got us where we are with this president, and voter suppression like we've never seen. We must have an offensive against this at the polls.
Yeah, the National Council of Churches actually came out and called for Kavanaugh's nomination to be withdrawn. This is from Wednesday, and here's a quote. The National Council of Churches, which has membership of more than 40 denominations, including most major Protestant and Eastern Orthodox denominations, wrote a statement in the U.S., wrote a statement on their website that they believe Kavanaugh has disqualified himself from his lifetime appointment and must step aside immediately. We don't often see the collective church or the collective bodies of the church come out in this way on a political nomination. Is that a hopeful sign that you are seeing the churches rise up against this kind of nomination?
Well, it should be. You know, we should not be Democrat or Republican, but we should rise up against injustice. But I would caution, and I can say this as somebody who, had attempted sexual assault twice as a male. Here's the challenge. Many of us came out against Kavanaugh from the beginning, not because he was a Republican, but because we looked at his record. His record, he supported voter suppression. He supported corporations, treating people like things and corporations like people. So from the beginning, he was already in violation of our deepest moral principles. This committee should have been challenged earlier. This is the same committee that gangsterized our politics, as Cornel West said. They held a seat for over 400 days. They have refused to fix the Voting Rights Act for 5 years. They denied 2 black women even getting a hearing so they could nominate, could have pushed forward a person in my state with white nationalist ties. They changed the rules from 60 to 50, and they refused to even put out his documents. So we have to understand that we must be engaged, but we must be engaged on all the issues because they're interlocked. The same people that are refusing to hear this stuff about sexual assault and stand with women are the same people that are suppressing the vote, and the same people that block living wages, and the same people that want to turn back health care, and the same people against immigration and justice. So what we have to have is a fusion offensive, and I would say that to all church denominations. We can't wait until just this happens, as horrific and as horrible as it is, because they were even raping and assaulting the system before we heard about these charges with Kavanaugh, and he was unfit for the office before.
The piece that is posted on NBC's Think is, if Kavanaugh is confirmed, we need to mobilize like never before. We'll put it on our social media as well. I recommend everybody read it. Bishop William Barber, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. More AM after the break.